Welcome to Security Token Stories, brought to you by Security Token Academy, the leading educational platform dedicated to covering and facilitating the security token industry. I'm Derek Edward Schloss, Director of Strategy at Security Token Academy. Coming up on today's episode, we have Bruce Fenton, CEO at Chainstone Labs and owner of Watchdog Capital, an SEC-registered FINRA broker-dealer for the security token industry. In this episode, Bruce and I chat through the blockchain and digital securities industry in light of recent COVID-19 events, including the $2 trillion stimulus package recently passed by our U.S. Congress. We also dive into Bruce's decades-long background in public markets, wealth management, finance, and eventually, its intersection with blockchain technology. Bruce shares his thinking on the opportunity for security tokens, ideas to improve our securities rules and regulations to better facilitate blockchain-based securities, and how COVID-19 might speed up the role of blockchain's influence on our society in the future. I had a great time talking with Bruce on a wide variety of topics. I think you'll enjoy this episode. Bruce, welcome to Security Token Stories.
Thank you.
We're recording this on March 26th. Before we get started, just in the last 48 hours, we've seen a $2 trillion stimulus passed through U.S. Congress. We've seen kind of the U.S. unemployment numbers jump earlier this morning. We've seen our asset markets kind of wildly fluctuate in all sorts of directions over the last few weeks. As someone with experience in finance and who's been following these events closely in a coordination and volunteer role, Bruce, how are you evaluating, or at least thinking about, the events over the last, day, 2 days in the context of the last few months?
Well, it certainly is confirming that this is what Strauss and Howe call a fourth turning, a radical change in the way the world works. And, of kind of the magnitude that it's hard for us to conceive of because we've never seen anything like it before. There hasn't been something like this, so we can't really compare it to 9/11 or Vietnam or other major events in our general history of, most of the people living today, the kind of things that they either remember or they heard of firsthand from their parents or even grandparents. But you get into truly radical events like World War II. There's a lot less people alive who can talk about that firsthand. They're very elderly. And there's less and less of them, and especially people who were kind of in their prime in those days. Those numbers are vanishing, and Spanish flu. There's basically nobody who really remembers that. Just a couple extremely elderly people. So it's not something in our psyche. It's not in our vocabulary of understanding the world and the way the world works and the rules that we have and who's who and how power works and how food works and how money works and borders and these kind of things. So I think it's, quite a big deal, really it's something that I don't think a lot of people have wrapped their head around, just how much, very radical and very quick change there will be. You're talking about, maybe 50% of restaurants that were in business a month ago may be out of business in one more month, maybe more. Very radical stuff.
Yeah, Bruce, we're going to get into more of your thoughts on COVID-19, on the macro markets and some of the work you're doing there on the ground. I know our listeners are also going to tune in to hear your thoughts on blockchains and tokenized securities, and I definitely want to hear your thoughts and parse through some of that here, especially
sure.
on its intersection with our current stuff that's happening. So, Bruce, to start, let's kick things off hearing a bit about your history, and we can go back as far as you'd like and walk through the presentation. I think you have a really interesting history here that spans public markets, wealth management, finance, and then eventually 7 or 8 years ago, Bitcoin and blockchain.
Right. Yeah. I am really lucky in that my mom was a stockbroker when I was a little kid, and stockbroker was kind of a really cool job back then. It was like what hedge fund managers later became. It was a very high-paying, high-profile, kind of cool job, and it was a very radical and wild business, a lot more like crypto is today. Where you see just radical things happening, legal actions, and companies going bust, and 10x returns overnight, and crashes and scams, and that's more like the markets were in the late 70s and early 80s. More like than they are, say, in the late 2000s. Whereby, by the time I entered the industry in the 90s and through 2000, 2010, the markets are pretty tame. I didn't have colleagues getting arrested and that kind of thing. It's pretty calm kind of thing, very rare. So they were sort of volatile markets. But as a little kid, I learned a lot by hanging out with her, and eventually I got my first job when I was 14 years old. I got a job at Dean Witter working as an assistant, and then by the time I was 19, I got my Series 7, and I've been doing it ever since. And in that kind of long career, 27 years, I've done all kinds of different things, working with tiny clients, working with, actually the actual global poor, like people in Somalia kind of poor, to billionaires, to, sovereign funds, everything in between. So I've had kind of a neat, sort of fun career that's gone through a lot of different phases and worked with a lot of interesting people. And then about 7 years ago or so, I got very interested in crypto and Bitcoin and, Ethereum and this kind of technology. And then, blending that with my, interest and the things that I had focused on in my career, securities tokens were a natural fit. So I think I was, one of the earlier people who was kind of thinking about securities tokens and talking about it. And I worked with a lot of the different projects as part of why I worked with Ethereum, but also a lot of other different projects that have, experimented with this. And I think I've tried to keep up with it and keep on top of it, because it is very, very interesting. And even in times of change like this, where the whole world is sort of being reinvented, it's not a matter of being opportunistic. It's a matter of just saying, okay, what are the best solutions as this world is rebuilt? And it is a better solution. And, maybe just like you see increase in telepresence and medical advances and advances in how people school, I think we're going to see radical advances in how securities move. And maybe it's because of necessity, because of this economic situation that the world is in.
Yeah. I think that's an astute point. Bruce, you touched on this, but I do think that you were, at least from my perspective, one of the first, or among the first group of folks that really took the time publicly to share your thinking around the opportunity of blockchain-based securities and security tokens. This was a few years back, but at the time, I remember you had created a series of videos. I don't know if you remember this, speaking to the intersection of blockchains with the way our public and private securities are offered and managed and settled across our financial system today. And you had hundreds of people tuning in, and you're whiteboarding kind of DTC and the flow of these of these financial instruments across these complicated systems. I know.
Right.
I think many people appreciate it and still do. You taking the time to break those concepts down in real time and take questions. So, Bruce, for our security token stories audience, what's the big idea here? Why were you so excited about security tokens way back in 2015, 2016, and why are you still excited about them in 2020?
That's a great question. And it's sort of why I did those videos, because I got into Bitcoin early, and I believe in I agree with the big, sort of Bitcoin maximalist kind of proponents, why this can be better money. And I believe it is very good money. And hopefully it can become a money standard. But I also think that where I differ from people is I also think that blockchain technology can have other uses, different types of use cases, including securities, because what it is, a blockchain is basically a ledger. And a ledger is basically a statement of truth. It says, do you have a lease? Do you own this car? Do you have insurance? Are you an employee at XYZ company? Is this your pay stub? Is this your bank account? All of those are ledgers. Ledgers help make our world work. And what's superior about a blockchain ledger is that it's more decentralized. Could be pretty much very decentralized like Bitcoin, but even more kind of captive, sort of semi-private networks. If they have 100 participants in a network who generally trust the majority of each other, those could be strong networks for certain purposes, like securities, where securities don't need the level of decentralization and hardness that Bitcoin needs to defend against sovereign attacks, because sovereigns aren't attacking securities, and securities are already centralized anyway. So even in the case of some radical thing like a theft or a systemic crash of the way the blockchain works or something, securities are still centralized. Disney shares are still going to be Disney shares. And a company, in a case like a theft or something, they can reverse it. They have that power now. Disney can take your shares now. It's very rare. They're not, you never really hear about people saying, oh man, Disney took my shares. Like, no, nobody gets their shares taken. It's extremely rare, but it can happen. I'm sure Disney has that power. If they're ordered by a federal judge, you better believe they're going to, if they say change now the thing is, this is part of the logistics. Disney doesn't really even have the ability to change, who has what. They have to go through all of these other parties. And that's the reason that a blockchain is exciting. A lot of people don't understand how big picture publicly traded securities work. It's this very crazy complex system of trusted parties that makes it so that different groups that don't trust each other can share in a common ledger. How do you know you own shares at Merrill Lynch? Merrill Lynch tells you. Well, how do they know? How do they know those shares are real? Well, they don't get it from Apple. Apple doesn't know. And they wouldn't share it anyway because, even Merrill Lynch is not going to share it with anybody, even Apple. They may have activist shareholders and they're only going to share what they're required to. So it's a very complex system. And a lot of people don't understand that. They understand blockchain and they say, that doesn't make sense because they don't understand the problem that's trying to be solved. The problem isn't getting rid of a centralized issuer. The problem is getting rid of these trusted third parties like DTCC and Euroclear and these other groups that are the ones that sit in between trying to make everything work between the brokers and the clearing firms and the counterparties and the actual securities issuers, none of whom really have a whole picture of who owns what. So that's why they have to trust these centralized third parties, which are, pretty good at their job, and they're quite technical, and they're probably open to this technology, but they are centralized parties, and they are a bit of a bottleneck now because they have the drawbacks of centralization. They just can't scale and move as fast, and it's a central point of failure. And in some cases, they even have actual paper. There was a flood, Hurricane Sandy. Physical securities couldn't be delivered. Times like now, you have to worry about those things. There was just some gold that wasn't delivered just the other day. So you actually have to think about these things now. So a blockchain could be superior technology for this, and it can make it so things can move across borders or something in a quicker way, which is important anytime, particularly in times of change.
That's a great walkthrough and speaking to kind of the value prop here. I also think this ties nicely into your work at Watchdog Capital, and this is your SEC-registered FINRA broker-dealer, which you've described as a decentralized securities and digital assets platform. So Bruce, what is your thesis for Watchdog? How do you see traditional finance and security tokens intersecting, not just from this high-level perspective, but from a practical perspective, and building this platform to kind of service that vision? What kind of customers do you expect to serve, and I guess how are you thinking about kind of the terminal vision for Watchdog over the next couple of years?
Sure. So the story behind Watchdog, I had been registered as a broker going back to 1992. I had a Series 7, and then for 18 years I was a registered principal, a Series 24. So I was very familiar with FINRA, very familiar with securities regulations and the SEC. I learned what the SEC was when I was 7. My mom told me about an arrest that had happened to somebody in her industry, and she came home, and it was just like my kids hear the gossip about the crazy things that happen in the blockchain industry. My kids know if somebody gets arrested, just like I did when I was a little kid. My mom came over and said, "Oh my gosh, you're not going to believe it. The police came in and there was an SEC and so-and-so got arrested." And so as a little kid, I always knew what the SEC was my whole life. And then I've been governed by them for 27 years now. So a few years back when the DAO came out, the DAO, Decentralized Autonomous Organization, which was, for those of you earlier in the space, that was kind of an ICO basically that was going to invest in other companies, and it was sort of the first, so there was no registration. It wasn't really working under an exemption or anything else, and they had a lot of fanfare, and it raised like 30 million in 30 minutes or something like that. And as a sort of former financial advisor, broker, registered person, I said, wow, that's incredible. I had two simultaneous reactions. I said, that is incredible. That's amazing. That's an interesting proof of concept for this tech. And then simultaneous reaction of, that is definitely going to be a problem from a securities regulation standpoint. Absolutely no question in my mind. I say, oh boy, I know the SEC doesn't mess around. I've been under, basically under their supervision for 27 years in some form, and I would not want to mess with them. I try very hard to comply with the rules. So, but I looked at it, I said, well, the good news is, the rules can be complied with. Millions of companies comply. Microsoft, Facebook, Google, Tesla, you name it, they all comply pretty much. There's a slap on the wrist here and there, but you know what I'm saying? I mean, they're able to operate.
Definitely.
And then the rules can be complied with. So right away, 3 years ago, my reaction, 3.5 probably now, my reaction was, this is great technology, but the step B, the regulation, that's just a matter of following the rules. So it was right around then that I said, you know what, I'm going to go, my license had expired by then. But I said, I'm going to go ahead and go back. I never thought I'd have my FINRA license again, but I said, I'm going to go ahead and get that back. They reinstated it for me. And then we acquired the firm. We acquired Watchdog, which is, and we got it all set up, and we discussed with FINRA, our business plans. We discussed digital securities and things like that. And it's been a great process. We're pretty early. So we're just going to have to wait and see how things unfold, particularly as the world is changing right now. So I guess that's one advantage of being early. We're going to be flexible. And also from a compliance standpoint, we want to be really, really careful. We haven't really, done much at all other than sort of announcements like this, just saying, hey, we've got this. We haven't really been offering any products to the public or anything like that, because we do want to be very, very careful as the world is changing. We want to look at, security, compliance, stability, compliance with all the regulations, especially if we do anything unusual. So we've been very, very conservative, sometimes too conservative. I sort of wish that I had, some amazing exchange going or something like that. But every new thing that you do, you need to get approved, and it can take time, and you want to be careful. So I've been pretty conservative, which probably is good in times like this when it's uncertain. You don't want to have a lot of, heavy experimental stuff right now. It's good to be back to basics, but that's one benefit of having been in the business a while. I can kind of look at, what are the basics about this business that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's advising people, matching buyers and sellers. That's basically it at the end of the day.
Yeah. A couple of things I want to unpack in there. First is, you actually spoke a little bit about this in an article you wrote for CoinDesk last month. This was at the end of February. It was called "Securities Law Helped Build Modern Capitalism. Crypto Should Embrace It." And I think this piece you wrote may have been somewhat as a response to the SEC Commissioner's safe harbor proposal. And if I had to kind of distill down the thesis of your article, I think it would be, instead of trying to expand the definition of securities or maybe create safe harbors for issuing new network tokens adjacent to that definition, securities laws in their current form should really be embraced and maybe improved and optimized directly. Do I have this right? Can you walk through your thinking for this piece? And I think you have a strong lens on the evolution of this space, as someone who has come from kind of a financial background and a wealth management perspective.
Right, exactly. So this is a great, follow-up sort of part two of the story from before with the DAO. Two ways that people responded to that. Some of them said, once it became clear, what was very clear to me in 5 seconds, which is, oh boy, this is a securities problem, most likely a violation, almost certainly. But as a compliance officer, not in 100 billion years would I have approved that. There's just no way. You have to be clearly under an exemption or clearly registered as a securities offering, and then on top of that, it's unusual. So you got to in that case, you got to go to the regulators and say, hey, by the way, here's how I'm complying, but just so you know, I'm doing something unusual. You want to talk to them about it first. That's this isn't the kind of regulators that you sneak around. So different groups responded different ways. Some of them said, "Oh boy, securities are a problem. Let's try and comply," and that was kind of a minority. Most of them said, "Oh, securities are a problem. We'll pretend we're not a security. We'll come up with this concept called utility tokens, and we'll do this and we'll do that. Well, it's not really a security. It's a membership in the thing that comes over here." And very clever kind of, things. And I was looking at this saying, the Howey test was named after a scammer named Howie. Okay. And Howie was like, nah, this isn't a security. This is the deal where you give me the thing and I'm going to give you the oranges. And, it's a snaky little deal. And that's basically what you had with these utility tokens. Like, oh no, let me, here's my computer algorithm of why this isn't a security. It's a loan on a claim of a foreign corporation for a foundation. And I knew this SEC's been dealing with this stuff since long before crypto. Since the days of Howie in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, my mom's era in the 80s, when I started in the 90s, all through. They've been watching. They've seen every version of scammer in the world. I mean, it's like the high school kid thinking they're going to fool the cops by saying, this isn't alcohol, it's mixed drinks. Like, come on, it's childlike thinking. And I said, SEC's not going for that. You raise $50-100 million in these things that are some kind of tradable unit on an exchange. Those things are going to be considered a security. SEC is pretty pro-business, but they're just not going to give up the definition of why they exist. And the definition of a security under the 33 Act and the 34 and the 41 and everything else, it's all the same long, broad definition. Stock, bond, debenture, evidence of indebtedness, investment contract, and investment contract is further defined by Howie, and so on and so on and so on. And there's cases that say should be interpreted very broadly. So clearly those things were, so that's why I went down the road of saying, I want to be registered. It's a harder road. It's a lot of work to become a FINRA member. And I was very lucky because, I've known the system. I complied with the system for a couple of decades. I did a whole bunch of audits. I've had 44 audits. I've seen who gets in trouble and what kind of questions they ask and what things they like and kind of can predict what they're going to go after next. So I had a big advantage having been registered so long, just sort of by coincidence. It's sort of lucky happenstance, at least for this one little area of securities tokens. But that's why we decided to get registered and go down the harder road of becoming FINRA registered and talking. But we're still very conservative, like I say. I think that's the way everybody should be, whether you're FINRA registered or not. You should really be cautious because the regulators don't really take kindly to activism, and they're not real broad in their thinking about sneaky ways around the rules. So I think you should just comply with the rules. But what I would like to see is have the rules themselves relaxed, have some more exemptions. I'd love to see an SEC exemption that said, raise Reg D up to 25 million or reg crowdfunding. Say, okay, let's make crowdfunding up to 50 million or something. And just make it easy, or change the definition of accredited to be anybody, because I don't, we haven't really thought through those rules. And now as the world is changing, it's a lot of times to say like, hey, does this make sense? Maybe this FDA approval process made sense 6 months ago. Maybe it doesn't make sense now. I don't think now is a time to have anybody bogged down. If some pharmacy or something needs to raise 50 million, hey, man, come on. Well, we got to help them. Anybody who's raising money now is going to be serving needs that people want, whether it's medical supplies or video games. So if somebody wants it, there's supply and demand. And we, as the world and the economy and capital markets, have got to support that. We got to make it so that the capital can flow wherever it wants, whether it's Tony in his garage who's figured out a way to churn out 1 million masks, or it's somebody who's invented a new machine somewhere, or somebody who does great poetry that comforts people in times of stress, whatever. Let the money flow where it's supposed to flow. The world knows where the money needs to go. The people know where it needs to go. Let them do it. Get out of the way. Now's the time. Let people do what they want. They're not stupid. They're going to do what they're going to do. And some are going to get scammed, and some are going to buy things they regret. But it is what it is. Overall, the more free you make it, the better the world works. So I'd like to see those regulations reduced. And it's just a different philosophy about how to attack the same problem. I don't think it's wise to try and go around it. I'd rather see them them reduced. I think we have a solid case for that. I'm big on smaller government in general, but I actually like the SEC. I mean, there's a lot of good people there. They seem pretty sensible, pretty fair. I think as far as regulators go, I think that we certainly could do a lot worse.
Yeah, all fair points. Bruce, something I want to come back to that you touched on. It's this idea of kind of the macro landscape shifting and changing, and you touched on this when you were describing Watchdog. This idea that these are times where the systems for doing things are changing rapidly around us. I'm not sure if you saw this, but for the first time ever, this was earlier this week, the New York Stock Exchange mandated an empty NYSE trading floor that where all trading systems and processes would be moved to 100% electronic systems. I'm curious, in light of this discussion and thinking through kind of how things are changing all around our markets, all around your business, Watchdog. I'm curious what you make of this. Do you see decisions like this as a stopgap based on the current crisis we're facing, or a larger sign that timelines for more efficient markets, ones presumably that eventually may be built using blockchains, that those solutions will be more aggressively pursued now? I guess my question is there an argument to be made that COVID is like the catalyst for a more aggressive pursuit of digital trustless systems to avoid future market meltdowns that may be predicated on things like physical infrastructure and intermediated structure? Or do you think this will eventually speed things up towards a tokenized future?
I think it probably will speed things up. We look at, in the last 2 weeks, schools have made 5 years of progress on distance learning. I mean, there's nothing that has ever mobilized this many teachers. I mean, if Trump, if there was never a virus, Trump would have come forward and said, hey, we're going to get the whole world on teaching before the end of the school year. Everybody's going to go homeschooled. It would have never, ever happened in a million years. They would have said he was crazy. And if he said 5 years, they would have said, okay, maybe 1,000, maybe you get one school district. It can't really be done. You're never going to get other states to agree. Maybe some crazy state will do it. You know what I'm saying? But everything changed in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, you have teachers, our teachers in our school district are doing meetings with tech experts on how to implement this technology and that technology. So times of change call for times of better solutions. And when everything is critical, you have lives at stake and economies at stake, any efficiency is better. This isn't a time where people are going to be luxury. They're going to say, hey, if this saves me 15 hours on this payment, then I need that 15 hours. These are tight times like that. So I think it is possible, particularly things where there's a lot of friction, but the world is changing very fast. I mean, if right now, all these loans come out, or you start having government contracts that say, hey, we need this many machines here or there or whatever, it may benefit to have something like a token where you can spin up a token. I mean, for something important. I mean, if Lockheed said, hey, we have a government contract to fight COVID, we need a $1 billion token and we need it tomorrow, and it's going to help save lives, and it's a huge business thing, and we need it. And I mean, boy, I'll make 10 phone calls and we're done. 6 hours. You get legal permission from a government. Government of UK says, hey, we need this right now for small businesses. Boom. I mean, Joe Lubin can do that in an hour. So that's a powerful thing. You can't do that in the old system. You can't go into the old system and do that in an hour. It used to be 3 months. And maybe they can trim it down to 2 weeks, but ain't nobody got 2 weeks in an emergency. If somebody needs to fund the, whatever firefighter boot company, they got to be able to send that money. So I think it is possible that you're going to see tokens, particularly as you also have another trend happening simultaneously with this, which is stablecoins and US dollar and other currency-backed stablecoins.
I was actually just about to say, just listening to you talk, Bruce, one of the things that's coming up for me is kind of the rollout of this stimulus that was just announced, and I'm looking through some of the documents, and administratively, like some of this, the receipt of some of these funds may be months, and you think about why that's possible, and really it's possible because of these legacy systems that we have. You just think about as the efficiencies gained just having a stable coin on a trustless ledger and being able to potentially distribute some of the stimulus using a digital dollar. I know there's some discussion around that. You put it best. In times of crisis, every efficiency is a major win. Anyway, that certainly came up for me as you were talking.
Yeah, and I think that it's the kind of thing where you have. I mean, look at how radical things are. You have the governor of New York saying, "Hey, I'll give you money, do whatever, do this," and you're going to have a lot of different governors and a lot of economic things. It may just be a business thing. It might be McDonald's trying to, they lost some revenue here, so they're trying to change something around. If it's a priority, I was thinking, I had an idea the other day about, if you had really high end, like a high revenue per person business. Like you're filming the Avengers, $100 million enterprise, and you got to shut down filming. You could potentially separate the key 50 actors, director of photography, separate them in some kind of compound somewhere for a couple of weeks, and then have them work together. And for $100 million business, somebody may think, yeah, you know what, that's a crazy idea, but that's worth $2 million to us. So maybe it would happen. So there's crazy things that would happen where you're going to see people say, "Hey, I'll pay a whole bunch of cash or a whole bunch of this or that because I need something done." And tokens are a pretty good way to have that stuff kind of more frictionless. And we need as little friction as possible right now to get the gears of the economy going. I mean, the whole economy is stuffed. We're talking about projections of what it's lost, but right now it's kind of like zero. The whole economy is stuffed. So it's not just what's lost, it's a matter of restarting the engine. And that engine's a big, giant engine. It's not just a little matchstick that's going to restart it. You're going to need a lot of effort to really restart that engine. And so making capital move around, there is going to be capital. There's going to be fortunes made and lost, but there's going to be capital that moves around, and there's going to be need. There's going to be needs served. And by definition, those are going to be the things people want. If there's some place where they need a certain supply and some business serves that, that's good. That's good economics. That's good morality. That's good for the world. That's good for humanity. The more needs that are served, the better. And so the more capital we put out into the system, all these loans, these trillions of dollars of loans, they're not going to mess around with that. We've got to, I'm not a fan of the stimulus, but hey, it is what it is. So let's go ahead and use it. Now that it's here, let's get it into the hands of as many people as quickly as possible. Banks should be just writing checks like crazy. And again, that comes back to regulation. They may have all these things, 30-day credit check, blah, blah, blah. No. My favorite restaurants, 5 of which sent emails in the last, 48 hours talking about layoffs and other issues. They need money now. I'm not a big fan of the stimulus, but now that it's here, hopefully it's going to get into hands really fast. Like, every hour counts. And so maybe tokens are a solution for that. And especially if it can come from, not so much a legal mandate, but the rules just get, the regulations getting out of the way. And they could do that. SEC, FINRA, other groups, they could say, hey, we're going to do a 1-year no action letter. Any business, go ahead. We get you. There's scammers, but you know what? Getting the world going, getting the economy going is more important. We're still going to prosecute you for fraud, but other than that, go for it, kind of thing. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but there are ways that they could, that officially through regulation, changes, laws, or regulatory action, they can make extraordinary actions. Our governor in our state, as many states, they've signed different executive orders saying, hey, we're not going to enforce this rule. Delivery of alcohol has been in a few states, including ours. It was illegal 2 weeks ago, and then the governor signed a 2-paragraph piece of paper that said it's not now. So I'd like to see some of that. It's a higher priority to do all the health and safety and consumer durables and food, but it would be good to see some of that for capital formation too. Let's just say, hey, you know what? During for the next 24 months, let's make Reg D crowdfunding a $50 million minimum, or let's put the definition of accredited investor. You don't have to be a accredited investor in the year 2020, 20 to 22. I mean, come on. Would that end would that be so bad? Like, oh my gosh, the Tony who only had 50 grand got into this and he lost it. Well, yeah. Guess what's going on in the world, man? We don't have time to be messing around with accredited investor rules from decades and decades ago. These are different times. Let's let the capital flow. And we got a lot of information out there. There's a lot of people, it's a lot easier to get a scam now caught than it was 40 years ago. 40 years ago, you wore a fancy suit and rented a Rolls Royce and drove into town. You could pretend you were, the big oil man from Texas, and nobody would know the difference. Then there's all these scams. They'd come in and talk a big game and write fake checks between banks and run out of town with $1 million. You can't do that now. We have Google. We can see people. You can even do face searches and things like that. So anyway, I would like to see the regulations significantly reduced so that you can have more capital flow. And I think, I'm optimistic about that. I don't know, there's a lot of other priorities that the country and the regulators and everybody else has right now. But hopefully, the things are moving fast. So maybe in a few weeks, there's other things that are more priorities, but eventually we could look at these kind of things. And, in some number of months, maybe we see some, I would imagine we'd see some flexibility. We already have, FINRA has said they reduced restrictions on supervision from home. They used to have all these rules like you can only work at home if the manager can see this and that, they kind of put a lot of those on hold. They're sensible. And I think in these times, even the toughest regulators are kind of looking at the world saying, okay, this is the new time to really make things work.
Yeah, I think what I like about your approach, Bruce, in thinking through some of these difficult issues is that it's a healthy balance, a healthy dose of regulation, and a healthy dose of creativity in times of crisis. And I think both of those things are important. I think thinking through ways, more creative ways for these worlds to kind of collide with one another, and that are a little bit more tailored to this particular moment in time is important. At least from to certainly have these conversations and to advocate for all unique approaches. I think this is a great conversation. Bruce, I would say the through line of our discussion today, and we'll wrap things up here. I would say the through line here is we're in a middle of a pretty significant period of economic history. There's a lot of forces that are happening all around us. Something I've noticed is just from your perspective and just watching you and interact with publicly, you've definitely taken on a volunteer humanitarian role in a lot of what's happened over the last couple of months. And I'd love to, close out with you speaking a little bit why that's important to you and things that you'd like the audience to be left with, just kind of around your thinking on this.
Yeah, I think, I was sort of early on this. I kind of saw, I got sort of obsessed about this topic early, and that helped me to sort of see that this crisis was coming, which was very, as it is for everybody, whenever they saw it coming, it's shocking. And it's, it's quite a thing. It's something none of us have ever dealt with before. So one way to sort of, I said, well, what can I do? I got to help somehow figure out something. You got to get your own situation, your family, your business. My business, it's sort of more necessary to pause.